You think you're tough. 5 ancient civilizations are about to prove you wrong, 1 century at a time. Ancient Rome. It's 80 CE, and you've got a rotting molar, and there is no such thing as painkillers where you're standing. You go to a doctor whose entire toolkit is iron forceps, a length of cord, and his own knee. He braces that knee against your chest, wraps the cord around the tooth, and rips it out while you're fully conscious, screaming, held down by 2 assistants who've done this enough times to know exactly how hard you're about to fight them. If the infection has already spread into your jaw, the treatment is worse. Cauterizing irons, heated until they glow, pressed directly against living tissue because a Roman physician's answer to sepsis is fire. You survive it, or the infection wins, and either way, nobody's offering you so much as wine to dull it first. Later that week, you go to the Colosseum, and it's not a treat, it's a Tuesday. Public executions run as scheduled entertainment slotted between the morning wild animal hunts and the afternoon gladiator bouts. Condemned criminals get thrown to lions and leopards at midday, a time slot so routine the Romans nickname it the lunchtime executions, and the crowd eats bread and dried fruit while people are torn apart. 20 feet in front of them. Nobody around you looks away. You're the strange one if you do, and children are brought along specifically to watch. Rome is famous for its aqueducts, and they're real, they genuinely move clean water across the empire. But they don't save you. The Tiber runs thick with sewage that flows straight past neighborhoods without proper drainage. The insulae apartment blocks stack families 5 and 6 stories high in fire-prone, disease-ridden conditions, and malaria alone kills so many Romans that later historians nickname the marshland outside the city the Roman fever. Your actual odds, if you're born into this empire, are brutal from day one. Somewhere between a third and half of all children die before age 10, and if you clear that first decade, your life expectancy still hovers somewhere in your 20s or 30s. Dragged down by childbirth complications, infected wounds, and diseases nobody here has a name for yet, let alone a cure. You could live next door to the emperor and still die from a scraped knee that turns septic on a Thursday. Aztec Empire. It's 1487, and you're standing at the base of the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan, and the entire plaza smells like copper. The Aztecs are dedicating the newly expanded temple, and Aztec chronicles describe a mass sacrifice running across 4 straight days, with victims, many of them prisoners, taken specifically for this purpose, climbing the temple stairs one after another to have their hearts cut from their chests on the stone altar at the top. Priests work in rotation because the ceremony doesn't stop for anyone to rest, and the blood runs down the steps fast enough that attendants can't keep the stone clean between victims. You watch the line moving forward and realize nobody in it is being forced at knife point. Refusing isn't really an option that occurs to most of them. You don't need to lose a war to end up on those stairs. The Aztecs run something called the Xochitl. The Flower Wars, ritualized conflicts fought specifically to take enemy soldiers alive instead of killing them outright in battle, because a dead enemy on the battlefield is worth less to the empire than a living one dragged home for sacrifice. If you're a young warrior captured in one of these engagements, your entire future collapses into a single purpose the moment you're bound. And even if you're never captured, even if you live a completely peaceful life, your position in this civilization is locked in place from the day you're born. Aztec society runs on a rigid hierarchy split between the Pipiltan nobility, who control land, priesthood, and government, and the Misahualtan commoners, who work that land and pay tribute upward, and almost nobody crosses that line in either direction in one lifetime. You can be the strongest, smartest farmer in your village, and your children will still be farmers. You can be born into a noble household and never once have to prove yourself against anyone beneath you. The entire empire, its calendar, its economy, its wars, is built to keep that separation exactly where it is. And it's defended with the same total commitment as the temples that need fresh sacrifices to keep functioning. Ancient Assyria. It's 700 BCE and your village has just lost a war against Assyria. And what happens next isn't a negotiation. Assyrian kings like Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal run their empire on a deliberate strategy of public terror. And the royal reliefs carved into the palace walls at Nineveh aren't propaganda exaggeration. They're documentation carved by the same scribes who recorded tax records. Captured soldiers get flayed alive in the open square where the rest of the village is forced to watch. Rebel leaders are impaled on stakes outside their own city gates and left there for weeks, slowly, so that every merchant and traveler passing by understands exactly what resisting Assyria costs a man. Severed heads get stacked into pyramids outside conquered walls as a permanent visual warning to the next city down the road, and Assyrian inscriptions boast about these numbers openly, because the fear is the entire point, not a side effect. If you and your family somehow survive the conquest itself, you're still not staying home. Assyria pioneers one of history's first large-scale forced deportation systems, and it isn't small. Entire conquered populations, sometimes tens of thousands of people in a single campaign, get uprooted and marched hundreds of miles on foot to resettle in distant provinces where they own no land, know no one, and have no way to organize a future rebellion. You lose your house, your fields, your ancestors' graves, the well your family has used for generations, all of it, in a single forced march under armed guard with the old and the weak among you not always making it to wherever you're being resettled. The point was never just winning the war in front of you. The point was making sure nobody in the entire region ever seriously considered fighting Assyria again, and for centuries, staring at those stacked heads and those men on stakes, it worked exactly as designed. Ancient Egypt. It's 2560 BCE and you're a laborer on the Giza Plateau. And contrary to what a lot of people assume, you're not a slave dragged in chains. You're a conscripted worker, pulled from your farming village during the Nile's flood season when the fields are underwater anyway, and put to work hauling limestone blocks that can weigh over 2 tons apiece, up wooden ramps in desert heat that regularly clears 40 degrees Celsius, using nothing but rope, wet sand to reduce friction, and the men straining next to you. Archaeologists excavating the workers' cemetery near the pyramids later find skeletons riddled with healed fractures, crushed vertebrae, and arthritic joints that belonged to people barely into their 30s. Evidence of bodies that absorbed catastrophic physical damage year after year and simply kept working because the rotation didn't stop for injuries. Go home and steal something out of desperation, and the punishment isn't a fine or a warning. Egyptian law under the Old Kingdom permits mutilation as formal punishment, cutting off a hand or a nose depending on the severity of the offense, leaving you with a permanent visible mark that identifies you as a criminal for the rest of your life in a society with no anonymity to hide inside of. And even if you avoid the law completely, live honestly, work hard, Egypt's child mortality rate doesn't care. A significant share of children born in this period never make it past their first few years, taken by infection, parasites carried in Nile water, or malnutrition during a bad flood year, with no real medicine available to intervene once something goes wrong. If you do somehow reach old age, don't expect the afterlife protections you've heard about in every documentary. Elaborate mummification, the imported resins, the fine linen wrapping, the amulets and grave goods meant to carry a soul safely into the next world. All of that belongs exclusively to pharaohs and the noble elite who can afford the embalmers. Your body, when you finally die after decades of hauling stone, gets wrapped in a reed mat and buried in a shallow pit out in the desert sand with none of it. And the monument you spent your life breaking your back to build was never intended to remember your name at all. Ancient Sparta. It's 650 BCE, and you're born in Sparta, and the first thing that happens to you isn't a name or a blanket. It's an inspection. A council of elders called the Gerousia takes one look at your body, checking your limbs, your spine, your lungs, deciding in seconds whether you're strong enough to be worth raising. Your mother has already washed you in wine instead of water, an old Spartan test, because the belief is that a weak infant will seize or sicken from the alcohol while a strong one shrugs it off. If the elders see something wrong, a twisted leg, a hollow chest, a body that just doesn't look like it'll survive a war someday, they don't hesitate. You get carried out to a chasm at the base of Mount Taygetus and left there. Sparta doesn't waste food and training on children who can't eventually kill for the state. You pass. Good. Now you have 7 years before the next test comes for you, and you spend them at home barely noticing the clock running down. At age 7, soldiers show up at your house and take you. Not metaphorically. They physically remove you from your mother's house and drop you into the Agoj, Sparta's state-run military training system. And you don't go home again in any meaningful sense for the next 13 years. You sleep on reeds you pull from the riverbank yourself and break by hand, because a real Spartan doesn't get a soft bed. You're issued one cloak for the entire year, no matter the season, and fed so little on purpose that stealing food becomes part of the curriculum. Getting caught stealing isn't the crime. Getting caught being clumsy enough to get seen is. Every year, there's a public ritual at the altar of Artemis Orthia, where boys your age are flogged in front of the entire city, sometimes for hours, sometimes until they collapse or bleed out entirely. And the ones who take it in total silence earn status that follows them the rest of their lives. You stand in that crowd and watch boys next to you go down. You're expected not to flinch, and you're expected to remember that the boy who died did it correctly. By your 20s, you're either standing in a phalanx as one of the most feared soldiers in the ancient world, trained since childhood to never break formation, even as the man beside you dies, or your body has been somewhere on that mountainside since the week you were born, and nobody in Sparta considers that second outcome a tragedy. It's just quality control.